Thank you. Good morning. Be very welcome. It's really nice to be here. I guess I'm going to sit here, there. Okay, sorry. I didn't rehearse that part. Well, thank you. It's really nice to be here. Welcome to the Pollution and Climate Change No Borders. I'm Danielle Dithurbide, as Axel said. As you all know, the US-Mexico Foundation is hosting the summit address to the most pressing issues and growth opportunities in North America. In here, our region's most prestigious institutions, universities, think tanks, firms, and organizations. More than 500 leaders from North America have gathered to discuss challenges and opportunities, travel, and most of all, hope. So it's my honor to introduce to my panelists, all of them, Council Member Kevin De Leon from City Los Angeles. Hi, Kevin. Welcome. Educator, activist, community organizer, and the first Latino leader of the California State Senate in 130 years. Hi, Kevin.
Hola.
Hola.
¿Qué tal?
Kevin quiere hablar en español, pero no nos dejan.
¿Qué no sabes?
As president of the California Senate, Kevin led this body to revitalize Los Angeles River, to clean up toxic waste around the former Exide Technologies facilities, and to founding for more than a dozen new parks and making Los Angeles schools more energy efficient. Kevin, among a lot of other things, also authored Proposition 68 to keep drinking water clean. Welcome, Kevin.
Gracias,
Bienvenido.
Gracias.
Y además quiere venir a vivir unos meses a México, entonces.
Eso sí.
Marius Calvet, Head of Sustainable Finance MX and Latinamerica for HSBC. Welcome, Marius. A lawyer and an internationalist specialized in Latin America studies. She's Mexican, of course.
Gracias.
Marius has 16 years of experience in corporate sustainability as an advisor to companies in diverse sectors and sustainability strategy, metrics, and disclosures. Welcome. And then Matt Petersen, CEO and President of Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator. He likes to say that his name, Mateo. Hola, Mateo. Welcome, Mateo. As the first ever Chief Sustainability Officer of the City of Los Angeles, Matt was the chief architect of the groundbreaking Sustainable City Plan and helped create the climate majors. Matt co-founded Global Green USA, a pioneer in greening and affordable housing, schools, and cities, as well as helping grow in solar sector. Among other things, Matt is the chair of the Climate Majors Board. Welcome, Matt. Welcome to Mexico City.
Thank you.
Also, Council Member Kevin De Leon will share with us some framing remarks.
Oh, thank you. More anything, Daniel. Muy buenos días.
Buenos días.
Buenos días to each and every one of you. It's in fact, it's an honor and pleasure to be here with all of you. The fact that the city of Los Angeles and Mexico have so much in common. It is both cities were founded by the indigenous peoples of this geographical region. Also at the same time, were colonized by the Europeans. But what we share is we share food, we share culture, even more importantly, we share the people, which is amazing, which is a huge capital asset that cannot be defined. But what we also share, unfortunately and sadly, is some of the worst air pollution anywhere in the world. Los Angeles, and we were having a lovely conversation last night with our friends from New Mexico. The state of New Mexico has some of the cleanest air in all of the United States of America. I think the fifth cleanest air as a state, in my understanding. The city of Los Angeles, for example, has the worst air quality for ozone in the United States of America. According to the American Lung Association, we're number one for that type of pollution. It has a huge impact on the public health, on the economic outcomes of the second largest city in America, the largest city geographically in all of the United States of America. So I think we're at an inflection point. We're at an inflection point, where we have an existential threat to the public health of our children, of our senior citizens, but also to our economy and how we grow our economy, how we transform our economy, how we transform a very antiquated old grid in the state of California, we're the fifth largest economy on planet Earth. So to put this in context, there's only 4 economies larger than that of ours. The United States of America in the aggregate, China, Japan, Germany, then the state of California. So to give you context of the magnitude of the economy, that means United Kingdom, France, India, Italy, as well as Vladimir Putin's Russia, our GDP is higher than that. And one thing I want to say too is thank you a los connacionales, los mexicanos que dejaron su país de origen, because we are the fifth largest economy in the world because of immigrants, but in particular from all over the world, but especially because of Mexico. That's why we're the fifth largest GDP on planet Earth, because of immigration, specifically from Mexico. So as we move forward and as we transform a very antiquated grid, an electrical system that powers our businesses, that powers, will soon be our cars, our residents, how we heat our houses is going to be very critical with investor-owned utilities, publicly owned utilities, how we pour in, not billions, but tens of billions and not hundreds of billions is going to be very, very key. The United States, it took us 150 years to build the grid that we have today. And in 30 years, we have to overhaul that grid. For California, we have to do it within 10 years. And lastly, let me just say this. As we share culture, we share language, we share people, food, but we need to share electrons as we move electrons across the border. Clean electrons that are driven by renewable energy or other zero carbon technologies that will grow an economy, that will lift people out of poverty into the middle class, because these are real jobs that are tangible. These are jobs you can outsource or offshore to Guangzhou, China, or elsewhere. And this is a real opportunity, how we deal with the financial instruments to provide the capital that's necessary to innovate and create the technologies, or China will lead the way with their investments from their own specific bank. So that's why strategically for our economy, for the economy of Mexico, and how we can go back into the future, with the type of investments. And to put this into context, lastly, I'll say this. I was here 1 month ago, and I had a lunch with some officials from the Bank of Mexico, El Banco de Mexico. And they had mentioned to me that remesas have already surpassed the economic output of Mexico's national petroleum, Pemex. So that gives you context of the magnitude of how we are linked to each other, as well as our fates. And that's why what we do with the issue of climate change, not just what's atmospheric with carbon dioxide, but what is criteria pollutants, NOx, SOx, ozone, particulate matter 2.5, which is all that smog, that ugly brown haze that our children breathe into their lungs every single day. We have us today, if you don't mind, we have the former mayor of the great city of Los Angeles, the former Democratic National Committee chair, Antonio Villaraigosa, who was just appointed by Gavin Newsom to help lead, transportation issues for California as we move forward, who's honored us with his presence here today. And as we move forward, it is key that we work with Washington and Mexico City, but California will continue to lead the way, because we don't import values from Washington, D.C. We export them to Washington, D.C. And I think that's the main difference as we move forward.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You were saying that pollution, in fact, it's the name of the panel, pollution and climate change knows no borders. Where in fact, there is a border between both countries. There is a wall, if there's even a wall. How can we fight these problems like a team? Like if there's really no borders between us?
It's a very, very good question. I know that when Felipe Calderón was president and the last president, Enrique Peña Nieto, we did have very close relationship. We did have many meetings in Los Pinos, El Palacio Nacional, with the energy minister, also with the environmental secretary at the time. You have a new president, AMLO. And I think the policies are very diverse and very different, in comparison to what we're doing in the United States of America. One of the key things in terms of financial instruments and investments is, will there be stranded assets, in the future in Mexico if they don't make the right investment? Because what we're betting on in the United States, but especially, and I can't speak for all the United States of America, I can only speak for California in Los Angeles, is that I think we're making the right investments to continue to grow this economy. So we have to share. One, we have to share our best practices. 2, we have to share our policies, regulatory as well as statutory. 3, we have to share also capital, which is very critical for the right investments. We have to share the best and most innovative technologies. And that is the close relationship that historically we've always had with our brothers, our sisters, that border that we've always shared. And I think that as we move capital, as we move commerce, as people move back and forth, we have to move those electrons, and we have to work closely with CEFE, and other, entities to make the right investments. But this will require, ultimately, at the end of the day, leadership, because we all have the best scientists in the world. And we have all the empirical evidence that you can only imagine from MIT, University of Chicago, Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Stanford. This is not a scientific issue at all whatsoever. We got some of the best advisors. Que paz descanse, el doctor Mario Molina, who I had the fortune. He was an advisor to me and my 100% clean renewable energy. He was an advisor to President Barack Obama as well as Enrique Peña Nieto. We have all the smartest people in the world. The question is leadership, ultimately at the end of the day. You have to effectuate that leadership that's critical. Just a few months ago, with a Hail Mary pass, we almost didn't get the infrastructure in Washington, D.C. With a Democratic president in the executive branch, with a Democratically controlled Congress, and with Democratic control, even though it's a slim margin in the U.S. Senate. That was a Hail Mary pass at the last minute. I remember a few months ago, Matt and I were meeting with Mayor Sadiq Khan from London, and we were there in the hottest day in the history of London, and then the hottest day in the history at the Aspen Institute in Germany. And subnational governments will play a key role, too, in hyper-local level as well, too. So it's not just national governments, president to president, or prime minister, but I would argue to each and every one of you that subnational governments hold the power, just as much, even more so, than national governments, because all the politics, the things that they can't get done. Antonio Garaygosa moved, incredible policies at the local level in terms of transportation, the port, reducing our particulate matter. I, as a leader of California, moved the 5th largest economy to become 100% clean, renewable energy by the year 2045. The city of LA now is accelerating that to 2035. That's the easy part. Now comes the hard part. And that requires the capital. That requires the technological innovations. That's going to be the hard part, but we have no other choice. Because if we continue to go in the direction that some other countries are going right now, they're going to have stranded assets and hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to become irrelevant.
So, Matt, how can we fight pollution, climate change as a team?
It's a good question. I mean, and you really need to, in LA, just as an example, Mayor Villaraigosa and the council member know this well. LA is a huge city. It's 4 million people, but it's one of 88 cities in the county, the regional government in Los Angeles. And just getting the entire region to collaborate isn't always easy to head in one direction. And that's why, an initiative like our organization, the LA Cleantech Incubator that I run, decided to try to do something which was unprecedented, getting the region to work together on transportation electrification. Our organization and the facility we're in, if you're ever in the Arts District in downtown Los Angeles, please come visit. It really was the idea of Mayor Villaraigosa and his team that made it happen in this incredible campus in the heart of Kevin De Leon's district in Council District 14. But to my point is, how do you get people to say, all right, how do we come up with a shared goal and work towards that goal? So there was no law that said we had to do it. Just said the mayor of LA, the county of Los Angeles, the utilities, our organization, the startup entrepreneurs, the private capital, the automakers, how do we come together? And I think we need to take that model across borders as well. And I think we've seen it. This conference in itself is a manifestation of that cross-border collaboration. And we share so many things, financial markets, automotive markets. A lot of our used cars come to Mexico when they get sold. Or how do we really help the whole region transition? But as the council member said, how do we really build the renewable energy? Because we can't power it all in California. We have to put solar panels in Arizona and Utah, where LA has a lot of power generation from coal power now, soon to be natural gas, and then transitioning, as the plan is, to green hydrogen. To do that, it's going to require a lot of solar energy. And that means we're going to need to put solar panels other places and put those electrons on the wires to power the regional economy. Electric vehicles are being made in Mexico and imported into the US. Now, final assembly will have to happen in the US to be able to qualify for the new federal EV tax credits, but that's regional cooperation, economic cooperation, and that's what we need to see more of.
Thank you, Matt. Marius, any remarks on this? How can we work as a team?
Have we worked as a team?
How can we work as a team?
Well, coming from where I come from the financial system, I think that we all have an opportunity we all know where we're heading towards sustainable development. There is the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, and the multi-thematic goals that have been established that where do we want to move towards, and also the climate agenda, of course, the goals established in December 2015 in the Paris Accord. So we all want to reach the same goals. So the important thing is to build the specific capabilities, and this is where I stand from. Most of the climate agenda, the climate activism, and the possibilities to actually transform are led by the financial system at this moment of time. So I do believe that if we find a way to transform, as it is happening, the financial system in banks, in the pension funds, in the asset managers, regulators, the capacities within the financial system are changing. We were just talking that our global sustainability head in HSBC, leading the sustainability strategy of a large bank that operates in 63 countries, is a woman that has a postdoctorate in environmental sciences. Yeah. So these are the times where the scientists on climate change are sitting down with bankers, with regulators, so just to move the capacities and transform the institutions to actually try to reach these targets. We are seeing, I do believe that the climate agenda has been initially moved forward from the risk perspective, from the statement that we all know that climate change is a risk for the entire global financial system, and financial institutions understand that their portfolios need to be reviewed with a lens of environmental, social, and governance issues at specific climate risk, as you were saying, the topic of stranded assets. Us banks, we do not want to see our clients not move forward with a sustainable business model. We know that the physical risk of climate change and the transition risk of climate change is going to affect our clients. Therefore, it's going to affect ourselves as financial institutions.
So let's talk about your personal experience. We've been hearing, we've been reading, we've been talking about net zero carbon economy for years, for many years. Can you tell us more about HSBC efforts to help contribute in this?
Yes, well, HSBC, as you well know, it's a very large bank in 63 countries, and it's been almost 20 years since the topic has been established. Actually, just yesterday, I was just told that within the whole bank, there's 400 committees that have the last name of ESG, climate, or sustainability. Ah. So those are committees in the risk areas, in the credit areas. There's people that has capabilities around climate change in the products for green loans, for sustainable linked loans or bonds. So it's one of the 4 pillars of the full global strategy of the bank. So what happened? We, of course, started with a governance structure. We need to have all the policies around the strategy that we have. We need to have the 400 committees, as I was saying. I may participate in a few, but it is still impressive how the bank has fully transformed. So the governance is important. We have a policy. We are having sectorial policies that we started with power and utilities and oil and gas to reduce our financed emission in those two sectors. And we're moving forward to try to reduce emissions in the upcoming sectors, which are, of course, you will know, mining, cement, automotive, transportation, and many others that represent emissions. So we're launching different and new products. You were talking about being creative on how to allocate capital to the sustainable projects. Well, every time there's different products. We saw in 2020 green bonds, more social bonds, COVID bonds, pandemic bonds, we saw inclusion bonds. We have launched gender bonds with FIRA, the agricultural bank in Mexico. So the possibility to be creative on how to have different products, innovative, to move the capital is something that is very interesting, and it's happening in banks the size of HSBC.
Thank you, Marius. Matt, we are all talking about Qatar's World Cup in just a few months. Oh, yeah. But in 4 years, we'll have a common World Cup. What's your vision for what LA and our region in general should look like for 2026 World Cup and LA 2028 for the Olympics?
Yeah, the Olympic Games, Paralympic Games will come to Los Angeles in 2028. So back to the example I was giving earlier, I didn't get into the details, but this regional collaboration, we in Los Angeles, we're not going to build any new facilities for the Olympics or the World Cup. And the World Cup, of course, is hosted across North America in different cities. But in Los Angeles, we've made this commitment to try to help the state and the region achieve its goals, to use the Olympics as a sense of urgency. The World Cup and the Olympic Games really helped, in 1984, the Olympics helped our region collaborate in a way it never had. Employers changed when workers were coming to the office to reduce air pollution, to reduce traffic. Our LA Football Club and the LA Galaxy, their match is called El Tráfico, and it's a big rivalry, but it's about who's got the most traffic going which way to which stadium. So really, what are we going to do to accelerate the move to zero emissions? We need to get the internal combustion engine vehicles off the road. We need to make sure the electric vehicles are available using the federal and state incentives, and we need to get the charging infrastructure in place. So how do we break down those barriers that stand in the way of making that happen? And so that's what we want to do by the time of the 2026 and 2028 games, and to do it in an equitable way. So how do we make sure everyone has access to the benefits of zero emissions transportation? It comes in a couple different forms. It can be making our streets safer for walking and biking so that you can walk to the market and feel safe and coming back. Or we've done 2 pilots with one of our startups and our corporate partner, Nissan, to put electric vehicles at subsidized public housing and provide it at an affordable rate, $3 an hour, to be able to rent an electric car to take a loved one to the doctor or go to the grocery store instead of being on the bus for 2 hours round trip with the bags of groceries. We need to find new ways to be innovative in the technology in terms of the service and business model delivery, and find where we need to put those dollars to subsidize those programs to make it possible for everybody to participate in really all the solutions to the climate crisis.
Thank you, Matt. I want to ask you the same question, Council Member. How does the region must look like, LA and the whole area, the whole region?
Well, in 2026, we'll have the World Cup, so the world will all be in Los Angeles, and in 2028, the world will return once again for the Olympics in 2028. In terms of infrastructure building, we won't have to do a lot what they did in Paris, for example, because we have UCLA, we have USC, we have the brand new, what is probably the world's most beautiful stadium right now, SoFi Stadium. We have LAFC, where Carlos Vela plays at. It's a beautiful soccer stadium. And the Galaxy, where Chicharito plays. We have the Rose Bowl. So in terms of infrastructure, a lot of it won't be needed, but in terms of public transportation, dedicated bus lines, I think Mexico in many ways is ahead of us. We can also
Really?
learn from Mexico. I see dedicated bus lines on La Reforma, Insurgentes, Sur. We don't have that, we should do that. We see dedicated bike lanes as well too. So I see at a local hyper local level, subnational governments, really being out there more so than we are, and we have to accelerate that. As we transition from internal combustion vehicles, ICE engines, to EVs, which will be really critical. The one thing that's very important is that, and I've seen a few Teslas here in Mexico City. So those are your early adopters. Those are people who have the financial wherewithal. They have money. And it's the same thing in the United States. If you're an early adopter, you have the financial wherewithal to pay as much as you want to pay because you have the money to pay it, to get the latest, greatest, most greenest, innovative technology. But how can we, in positions of power, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's not capital markets that correct the inequities. That's why it's always very important that whatever level of government that you're at, you have to provide the leadership. When you provide predictability and clarity, and when you say this is the deadline, by this year, we have to be 100% zero carbon renewable energy. It's very clear, and it sends a signal to the markets. Once it sends the signals to the markets, then capital starts flowing that's on the sideline. I think folks appreciate that, because if you don't do that, the capital markets do not correct inequities. Free market forces are very powerful. They're much more powerful than, I think, presidents, than mayors, But if you have clarity, transparency, and predictability, which I think folks want, they want predictability, even though they'll complain. They say, we don't want to go here, this is too expensive. You have to do it. And I'll give you an example. We did the tailpipe emissions, standards, but also efficiency mileage standards in California with one of our colleagues from the Schwarzenegger Institute, Francisca Fran Pavli. And General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler sued the state of California and said, you have no right, nor do you have any business getting involved on fuel efficiency standards. Who are you? You're not the national government. Long story short, we moved the bill forward, signed it into law. We got sued, went through the federal courts. Federal courts, ultimately at the end of the day, says you have the power to do so. So as a result, the big three in Detroit, what do? Do we build specs for one type of vehicle for the rest of the country and the world, and just one for California? They said, no, we have to build the same standards now for California. So if you don't believe in climate change, and you live in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and you believe the earth is still flat, if you buy a Ford F-150 pickup truck, you have more money in your pocket, you have higher fuel efficiency standards because of California. Because you have to, that's the power of leadership. And I can't underscore and emphasize to each and every one of you, without the right political leadership at every level, the local, state, and federal level, it doesn't happen. This stuff doesn't happen on its own. That's why we can have symposiums at Stanford, at UNAM, MIT, Chicago, Harvard, Yale, and we can talk about the stuff, and we can write and publish books about it, and do all kinds of things, but it doesn't happen. To be executed to, it's critical that you have the right leadership. Once the policy or statutory or regulatory framework is developed, you need the execution, and it has to be done with the metrics, because if not, we won't get there. We want, by 2028, we want clean air. And also in LA, we have close to 3,000 people who die every year prematurely because of all of the ozone that they breathe into their lungs. The district I represent, and let me give you this context. I represent Los Rascacielos, el centro de Los Angeles, the biggest economic commercial epicenter of all of Southern California, downtown LA, la cuna de nuestra mexicanidad, el vecindario de Boyle Heights, Boyle Heights neighborhood, where Doña Coquita Fernandez came a couple weeks ago because we just named the street Vicente Fernandez. Yeah. Con Alejandra y Vicente Jr., todos llegaron, todo el mundo, no? Right there, you have 5 major freeways that crisscross the district like a serpent that chokes the air, the oxygen out of young girls' lungs. And that's why when we move electric vehicles and technologies, it has to be done through the lens of equity. And how do you provide that capital? So then those who are not early adopters because they don't have the financial wherewithal to access the latest technologies, perhaps on the secondary market through the EVs, but how do we build out the infrastructure charging stations? So what I want by 2028 is what Matt just mentioned. Walkability, sustainability, more trees, more canopy, which Mexico City does an amazing job in comparison to us. Amazing, stunning. Parque de Mexico, Parque España, Bosque de Chapultepec, our parks, we make them naked. For some reason, we like them naked. We don't want shade or canopy. It's bizarre, but we do things backwards in that time. So we can learn and share from each other. But, public transportation and how to change behaviors. How do you get the middle class into public transportation? Because those at the lowest economic strata are already in public transportation. It's not like New York City or Paris or the Tube in London, where everyone at every economic strata, by far and large. Here, we have that problem in America, more so in Los Angeles. So how do we change behaviors? How do we make it much more prolific, And those are the challenges, but those are challenges, good challenges to have. And I think we're up to it. I think we're excited about it. We're excited about it because we didn't do a lot of good things the right way for years, if not decades, so we have the challenge that's before us. That's what's going to make it very exciting.
Okay, so we all know the size of the problem when it comes to pollution and climate change. So the next question will be for the three of you. I'll begin with you, Marius. How can we encourage more the public and the private partnerships for climate action?
Well, if I can start, what we have been saying is that, as I was saying before, I see how the ESG or climate agenda is moving in Mexico. And somehow at this moment, it's being, of course, led by the financial system, but from the private sector. We are seeing the private sector companies being, of course, pushed by capital markets, by investors. They are asking for more and better disclosures and better data around climate. There's frameworks around how to disclose on climate-related risks that actually in the stock exchanges, they are compelled to do so. And also we're looking at the regulation, the proposal of regulation from the Security and Exchange Commission. Of course, what we're seeing is that is pushing in Mexico not only the larger companies that are issuers or public companies, but also all the suppliers and the supply chain of those large companies. So we're seeing a private sector-led climate agenda in Mexico. We really need the public sector to step up. We are looking at the public sector in Mexico. In 2020, a Green Finance Council was established by the Mexican regulators. They created 4 working groups around this Council of Green Finance, around taxonomy, disclosures, financial movement of capital, and they're trying to figure out how is the regulation in Mexico going to look like, of course, in the topic of taxonomy guided by the European taxonomy, but I think it's moving in a slow pace. We need we only have a regulation in place right now for the pension funds from the CONSAR. In January this year, the pension funds are, by regulation, they have to integrate environmental, social, and climate and governance risks into their investing decisions, which is quite interesting. And also the pension funds in Mexico, through the organization Amafore, they have homologated the data that they're asking for the companies to disclose. So that is really good, but we still have to see regulation around the stock markets, the banks, the investors, and maybe other parts of the financial system. So just to close, in private and public collaboration, I think that the private sector is moving a lot faster, and the public sector needs to step up to actually provide incentives and the motivation to actually move forward the agenda. We need every actor in the economy to move this way.
Thank you, Marius. Matt?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I referenced earlier this public-private partnership where we have automakers and truck manufacturers, bus manufacturers working with, the transit agencies, the elected officials, the regulators, our Air Resources Board. How do we come together? And we need more examples like that. I will add another, which is how do we get more capital off the sidelines, private capital markets off the sidelines? And that's going to be through market signals and other ways that the government partners, local government like City of LA or the state, can de-risk those investments. And so we have entrepreneurs that come into our doors at Lacey that are looking to do game-changing solutions to help fight the climate crisis in an equitable way. But they need access to capital. And women, Black and brown founders have the toughest time getting access to capital. And for those from communities that don't have generational wealth, where they don't have home ownership because of historical redlining or institutional or bias barriers that they face in getting access to being able to own a home, they don't have an ability to get access to debt or to loans, which is critical. So most people in the startup world think, oh, I'm going to go raise a bunch of venture capital from Silicon Valley. Yes, that's absolutely part of your strategy, but debt is cheaper than venture capital. It's cheaper than equity. So what Lacey did, we went to one of our partners, the Wells Fargo Foundation, got a $500,000 grant and said, we want to create a debt fund that doesn't require personal collateral, doesn't require personal credit scores, to be able to help provide cash flow loans, basically bridge loans to our startup founders for for a year to 18 months. Now we talked to banks like Rabobank. It's the largest agricultural bank based out of the Netherlands, now the biggest financer of solar and renewable energy in the United States. They were trying to come up with a similar loan product, but they couldn't make the numbers work. There's just not enough margin for a bank to do this. So earlier at the opening plenary, there was discussion about the role of nonprofits. CDFIs are something that are well known in the US. But in this case, we said, let's fill this gap. Let's create this debt fund so that our founders and other entrepreneurs through partner incubators can access capital. We did some microloans to test the market. Wells Fargo came in. And we went out and said, who can partner with us to scale? We got one of the co-founders, his family office, a well-known, if you look for something on your phone, you use the device, the search engine he and his partner created. His family foundation put in $3 million. Another wealthy family out of San Jose put in $3 million. Now we have the first Cleantech debt fund targeting entrepreneurs in the United States of America. That's the kind of way where, because the city of Los Angeles, because Councilmember De Leon fights for our organization to get a share of federal money to be able to help these startups, we have the capital from the government, the utility and others in our facility. We're able to leverage those public dollars and bring private capital to the table with the mix of philanthropic and government as well, that make things possible, that makes it easier for an entrepreneur to say no to doing venture when they don't need to, so that we can help people be financially responsible, create wealth, and solve the climate crisis.
Thank you, Matt. Councilmember.
I agree with everything that's been said here. I think that we have to really double down on our efforts, even more so. We have to accelerate. We just simply, I'll give a more macro perspective. I think that Matthew did a good job with regards to micro, especially the limited access to entrepreneurs, those women and individuals of color. I do believe that we have to accelerate. This is not a time to slow down. I view it in three pillars. One is the issue of public health and pollution, and the right to breathe clean air into our lungs. Your financial wherewithal dictates to where you can live and you have access to Mother Nature and clean air. Two is obviously the existential threat, what is atmospheric, and that is CO2, carbon dioxide, what we talk, extreme weather patterns, and in real time what's happening, for example, in Florida, in a state where a governor perhaps doesn't believe, in climate change. What we see people from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua fleeing, their home countries because of devastation to their economies, the agriculture, and we create, a refugee status. It's the issue of drought, which is going to take place, and it's taking place right now in Mexico, and the issue of water, whether it's Sonora, Chihuahua, and other states in California. The drought is devastating. Central Valley, which is the breadbasket to the United States of America. And then we come to the issue with regard to the third one is, how do you transform an economy? How do you actually build an economy and create jobs that are real, that are tangible, that you can touch and you can feel, that you can export or outsource or offshore? And I think that's the right leadership, and you have to accelerate that. If you don't, we're just going to, it's going to make it much more difficult, and to the point that the stranded assets, all the capital that will be invested will, quite frankly, I believe will just sort of evaporate. And I do believe that, and I've said this time and time again, for when it comes to our national security and our economic security, with regard to the turmoil in the Middle East, with Iran, with Iraq, with the turmoil, what is happening right now with regards to Russia and the Ukraine, and what has happened with regards to inflation and the price point, at the pump with regards to fossil fuels and gas, it's very clear. If we're going to have national security as a nation, and with our partners, our friends, our socios, our next door neighbor, the Republic of Mexico, we have to accelerate and double, triple, quadruple down on these policies. And I understand 100% that it makes a lot of folks feel uncomfortable, but scientists already come. It's like saying, hey, you go to a doctor, says, you got a tumor there. And that tumor is metastasizing. It's going to take your life eventually. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in what you say, and I think what you're wrong, and the doctor keeps saying, that those tumors it's spread throughout. And this is what it is metaphorically. And that's why I believe with regards to migration patterns, I wish we had an immigration reform package on the US side. Unfortunately, we're 36 years now in Washington, D.C. without any immigration reform. It's not that tough, it's not that difficult, just get it done, This is gonna be really critical. And one last thing I would say, my former Chief of Staff, Dan Reeves, we were invited to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences at the Vatican. So we spent the whole week there. We gave a presentation, then Governor Jerry Brown gave a speech, I gave a speech, and some other folks. There was a professor there, gave a fascinating, presentation from the University of California at San Diego, UCSD, in San Diego, La Jolla, frontera con Tijuana. And he did a whole PowerPoint presentation, and I forget the name of a city. It was in Libya in Northern Africa, that the temperatures will be about 125 degrees on average. And what we'll do is they'll force the migration, and they'll cross the Mediterranean, and they'll go to Italy. And he did a whole presentation that what will result is that you will have a lot of anti-immigrant animus, and you have a rising of the far right wing, and perhaps fascist governments. Well, we see that in Hungary. Italy just elected its first female leader, prime minister, who skews to the very, very far right. And you're going to see that happening. And that is the extreme weather patterns and having geopolitical impacts. For us here, next door, when you have drought in Sonora and Chihuahua and other states, El Bajío and Guanajuato, in Central America, you're going to have the forced migration patterns. And that is a serious issue, because with that comes severe financial consequences. So that's why we have to accelerate and double, quadruple down. So not just locally in LA, but everywhere else in Mexico and everywhere else, in the United States of America. And I'd be lying to you if I said the rest of the country in the US on our side is as progressive or as far-reaching, because the answer would be no, it is not. But that's why I think we're here today to accelerate those types of bonds and relationships that exist, regardless. It's the sexenio. I won't get into those dynamics right now, but we just got to keep working together.
So about the consequences, this question is also for the three of you. We've been talking for 45 minutes about banks, about companies, about governments, local governments in this case. Marius just said that we need to make the public sector to step up. So, with inactive governments, with leaders denying the problem, you were talking about Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, saying that the climate change does not exist. With many decision makers being more interested in money than in the problem, how can we encourage the people, the common citizens, our friends, our families, to take action, to take climate action? Marius, thank you. Ladies first.
Well, I think that, of course, it is controversial to listen still at this time someone that does not believe in climate change. It is something quite impressive, of course, but I still believe that in terms of the economy, we all heard the news, the recent news, that there's more people employed in renewables than it is employed in oil and gas. We all know that it's a full economy going on towards sustainability in the companies. So we know that it is real. Every company is exposed to the physical and to the transition risks that climate change make them face. As you were saying, a company that does not integrate this is going to be not only not relevant, competitive, or innovative in the medium term or the long term. It's not going to exist. It's essential to the mere existence of the company to actually integrate this. So I think that as a bank, we have a good sense and a good feel of companies and the economy, how we are working to, how we're facing climate change. We see, of course, global companies and large companies that are pressured by capital markets, which understand this very well, have the teams, the data. And we see medium-sized companies that are starting to be integrated into this via the supply chains of the larger ones. But we need to move the full economy. 90% of the people is working for an SME, and it's 85% of the economy. So we really need to move the smaller companies too. So what I see is that there needs to be a lot of awareness, a lot of training, a lot of building capabilities within the companies. Also, as a bank, we're training our executives to have a better dialogue with the companies and not wait to see whenever the client reaches out because they want to set solar panels in their industry. We need to be active and to propose, and bankers to be able to have this dialogue with clients around how are you transitioning to a sustainable business model. So there's a lot of awareness, training still needed to be done, a lot of tools, a lot of transforming for access of capital. We talk about green loans, sustainability-linked loans, but smaller companies do not have the resources to pay for a second-party opinion, do not have the data to fulfill these products. So I think there's still a lot of training to be done and awareness from the people that we work in this topic since many years ago.
Thank you, Marius. Mateo.
We talked about access to capital a couple minutes ago, and you brought up more people are working in the renewable energy industry than there's oil and gas. And yet, one of the best ways an individual can be doing something, yes, voting for leaders that believe in not just the climate crisis, but bold, equitable climate action, and with regulations and voting for people who are going to push for regulations of corporations to better disclose climate risk and then lead to global change. It doesn't matter if Bolsonaro is denying climate crisis, but the corporations that are doing business there are part of a global financial ecosystem that makes it that they have to and support those businesses in those countries regardless of the governments. But back to what we can do as an individual, yes, we can save energy, we can save money by having a more energy efficient home. If we can afford a car, if we buy a more fuel efficient vehicle or an electric car, you save money instead of going to the gas pump. But you can choose to be part of the green economy. In our case, and for entrepreneurs, access to talent is as important as access to capital. So we've created a workforce training program where we're in the middle of our first all-female EV charger maintenance workforce cohort. And why are we doing an all-female workforce cohort? But even though fixing an electric vehicle charging station is mostly an IT job, diagnosing the problem, fixing the internet connection, and having some electrical safety training, 80% of the time it's a non-electrical issue, we still have 70% of the applicants are men. So how do we show that this is a job women can do comfortably and without any fear of working in that space for whatever reason may seem as a perceived or a real barrier? And so we want to bring more people into the green economy by getting them trained and into how to fix an electric vehicle, how to fix an EV charger station, how to fix a microgrid, solar plus storage. These are the things that are going to make up our economy of the future and that everybody can be part of. and we need to transition from the oil and gas workers into the green economy. We know that's the future. There are more jobs there now. We need to prepare the workforce to help in this transition and transformation of our economy.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, you said something perfectly well, which is when it comes to energy efficiency, when it comes to renewable energy, when it comes to zero carbon technologies, there are more people employed in that space than the extraction industry. And that is a statistical fact. And it's going to continue to increase, so you get more folks involved. Not everyone's going to know what an electron is or what energy efficiency is, but I know there's a lot of folks going to know what a job is and what that job provides you an ability to put a roof over your family's head, clothes on your children's back, food on the table. So that's something that's real and that's tangible. And how you grow an economy, in this space is critical. So I think that's really, really important. And I really can emphasize enough, and I know it sounds like a broken record, but the issue of leadership and political leadership is absolutely critical. And I'll give you an example. When California went to a renewable portfolio standard, RPS, with regards to moving energy efficiency on the grid. And when I talk about the grid, for those who have a hair blow dryer, for those who have a hair straightener, those who have a coffee machine, a refrigerator, if you watch Netflix or Hulu or HBO, when you turn your lights on and off, the lamp, that's all electric. And that comes from the grid. And the grid has been powered by fossil fuels. It's been powered by coal. And for California, that was about 50%, a little more than 50% output in terms of fossil fuel into the atmosphere, as well as into our air that we breathe into our lungs. When California, and this is before my time, when California said, we're going to do 20% wind and energy for the grid, everybody, even some of the sponsors here today, which we're good with now, they're like, you're going to destroy the economy. You're going to increase rates, and you're going to cause high unemployment. They did it anyways, 0 to 20, and the opposite happened. Then we went to 20 to 33%, and I was there. I was in the assembly, I think, at the time. It was Joe Simitian from Stanford, Senator Joe Simitian, my colleague, and they said the same thing. So then when I became the senator and the leader of the California State Senate, I took it to 50%, and everyone came out in opposition. And then Donald Trump got elected and threatened to get out of the Conference of Parties 2015 COP. So that's when I doubled down, and I took it from 50 to 100%. And there's a difference between rates, because always people complain about rates. California has high rates, utility rates. There's a difference between what your rate is and what your bill is. What you pay out of your pocket, your bill, is what makes the difference because of energy efficiency, which is the low-hanging fruit. And when I talk about jobs, double pane windows, window fenestration, insulation, those are real tangible jobs that must be done by human beings. And that's how you lift the working poor up into the middle class. That's how you transform an economy. And that's what I believe is both the present as well as the future. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Council. I can't believe it, but our time is almost over. So it would be interesting to know your closing remarks. Kevin, Matt.
You start down the end. Okay.
Sorry about that.
I would just close with the same sense that how do we, the market signals that policymakers send are fundamentally important. We've seen that in California. We're seeing that now finally with some federal action with the Inflation Reduction Act, and of course building on the CHIPS Act, which was bipartisan, and the bipartisan infrastructure package. But those market signals are fundamentally important to get the private capital off the sidelines. And we need more bold leaders, and then we need the financial institutions, the investors, to step up and really fill that gap, and that call to action that comes with it to transform our economy and help us accelerate, response to the climate crisis. It's an existential threat. And so how do we with the realities of the climate science go from let's just survive extreme heat. I mean, we just lived through 2 weeks of extreme heat where in places in LA that never needed air conditioning ever, where people are, putting in window units, and that's increasing the demand on the grid. Well, then the grid is strained. Now we've got to deal with these consequences of the climate crisis in a bold way that also puts people to work and grows our economy. We've proven it in California. We can do it elsewhere.
Thank you, Matt. Council member.
It's important that we continue to delink and carbon from GDP, which means that we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time, we can actually grow an economy. And I think that it is important that we do continue to disrupt the status quo, whether it's in the regulatory markets, whether it is governmental policy or lack thereof, whether it is the capital markets who are too shy, too tepid, and are staying on the sidelines, being perhaps overly circumspect and overly too cautious. So we have to disrupt the status quo. We share a border, and we share culture, we share food, we share language, and more importantly, we share people. And we can move electrons, and we can share best practices, innovative technologies, and policies that will uplift communities as a whole. And I think if we continue to disrupt, we can continue to be that beacon of hope and opportunity in a very uncertain world.
Thank you. Marius.
Thank you. Well, just talking about the North American region, of course, the climate crisis is global. There is no corner of the world that is not exposed to the physical and the transition risks. But there are differences within our region. There are differences as to the probability of some physical risks, the full magnitude of impact of the risks. Some cities are more exposed to some physical risks, others less. But still, it's something that we should all work in from wherever we work. I work in a bank, but everybody has a responsibility. And we can move policies, we can move the governments, we can ask all the organizations to step up. But it also needs to go down to the individual, to our own decisions and everyday decisions. And I know you've heard this many times, but every decision, every consumer decision that we make counts. So I think that we're talking about banks, we're talking about capital markets, but everybody needs to really wake up every morning and understand that every decision we make has an impact and is relevant to the climate agenda.
Poner nuestro granito de arena, diríamos en español. We have a few minutes for a Q&A session. Before that, I want to express that I'm very thankful with the Schwarzenegger Institute. Thank you, Francisca, and of course with the US-Mexico Foundation for organizing this amazing conversation. So if any of you have a question, I kindly ask to introduce yourself and then make.
I'm Joe De La Rosa from New Mexico Department of Transportation. So in New Mexico, we have 2 million people. We have like 2 million registered vehicles. Even if tomorrow we were to do free EVs and everyone got an EV, those gas-powered vehicles are still going to be on the road somewhere. A lot of them will end up south of the border along, Ciudad Juarez and these areas. So are there any thoughts or ideas of what we actually do with these vehicles to get them off the road as we transition to EVs?
I think an idea possibly is the question of conversion. And I know that just a couple of months ago, we were in London and there was a Volkswagen bus, and they made the conversion from ICE, internal combustion engine, to an electric vehicle. And we were driving around Westminster, and the VW, and we were going to tweet it out and do social media, but then we said, well, we better not do it because what if someone criticizes me? You don't have a driver's license to drive in the United Kingdom and London.
The other side.
So let's not do it. Let's not invite the controversy.
I can show you the video later.
Yeah. But conversions. What we're going to do is we're going to take a lowrider. If you know what a lowrider is with hydraulics, we're going to take a lowrider and we're going to do the conversion of a lowrider and sort of kind of send a message for the Latino Mexican American community. We just opened up a brand new bridge $588 million bridge, the 6th Street Bridge in my district, close to a little more than $500 million. When we opened it up officially, we cruised a lowrider with hydraulics jumping up and down. It was meant to be symbolically very important, but we're going to do conversions. The price point is high, without question. We have to lower that price point because you're right. What happens in the secondary market? And does the secondary market end up in Juarez? Does the secondary market end up in Guatemala, El Salvador, Tegucigalpa, and elsewhere? You know, and I don't know if Matt has any, probably some other ideas.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's one of the things that regulators and policymakers in California have struggled with. What about leakage in various forms? And leakage is also inclusive of those vehicles, those dirtier trucks and cars going to other markets, other states, and other countries. And one of the ways that California's been beginning to deal with the most polluting, most inefficient vehicles is to actually scrap them. So, you know, cash for clunkers, you know, actually take them to scrapyard, put them out of service rather than keep them on the road. I think another piece is what Kevin talked about in terms of conversions. How do we get the cost of doing a conversion of a car that still has a useful life in terms of its chassis and the body and convert it to an electric vehicle? That's something that we're seeing some startups and entrepreneurs enter into that space. We're going to do it starting with this lowrider project in LA. You know, and I guess the other unintended consequence is that those vehicles hopefully are the more efficient vehicles that, because of California's regulations and people like Governor Schwarzenegger and Kevin De Leon, that the vehicles that are going to go south of the border or to other markets are more efficient than the ones that are there now. So it's not that answer, but that's, you know, a little bit of saving grace.
Daniela, can I add something?
Sure.
Because I love the question, because it does not only apply to the transportation industry. We are giving loans for energy efficiency for companies larger and medium, and for the topic of changing refrigerators, motors, air conditioning, it's the same thing. This not efficient machinery is going in a secondary market to smaller companies that cannot afford the more efficient ones. So we need to talk about circular economy. We need to talk about disposal, or what to do with the non-efficient. So it applies, and we're working in that as a bank also when we're lending for energy efficiency, to actually try to close the circle on where is the other machinery going to. So we have the opportunity to do something interesting there.
Thank you. Yes?
Hi, thank you for the panel. My name is Devry Bufner-Vorwerk, and I'm on the board of the US-Mexico Foundation, and just really honored to have you all here. I grew up in California, UC Davis grad. I now live in the Midwest. I spent time early in my career as negotiating with the Mexican government as part of the US government on cross-border trade in food and agriculture, et cetera. My question relates to how we lean into this North American way by taking sort of a systems thinking approach to the region. And we're talking about this around energy, food and agriculture, et cetera. In its most basic form, food is also energy, right? We are sub-optimizing our potential, our human potential in the region, because we're not getting the right kind of food and energy to our people. Based on California, I've always believed we drive the change, right? We drive the change. I now live in the Midwest, in Minnesota. The Inflation Reduction Act just came out, and it has incentivized significantly the corn to ethanol equation, and actually incentivized it such that banks are financing a 2,200-mile pipeline, all in the upper Midwest, to take the offtake of ethanol, the carbon, pump it into these pipelines, push that into places in the region that will actually push it into pools, Class 6 pools. In addition, not use any of that carbon for what I believe is a great connector of our three economies, which is regenerative soil. I mean, soil is actually the most efficient way to process the carbon. Not trying to confuse you, but I'm trying to introduce a systems-wide thinking. How do we back up as a region, given that our three governments and even our local and regional governments have difficulty collaborating? How do we back up and take a more systems approach to our energy system We talk about how HSBC is financing, and really skilling up on ESG. My watch just came through and said Bain is now bringing all their consultants up to speed on ESG. How do we not accidentally sub-optimize our potential because we're taking more subsystem approaches like the Midwest Carbon Express or some of these other sub-optimized approaches? It's a really loaded question. You don't have to answer it all. Obviously, I'm trying to throw out a more difficult equation of how we actually come together in the North American way.
Great.
You want to go for it?
Well, it's a good question. I started getting involved with an organization called Kiss the Ground, which is focused on regenerative ag, and which is just more ground. It's not to simplify it, but more ground cover using the soil for carbon sequestration, but keeping the carbon in the ground and keeping healthier soils and growing diverse crops and getting out of monocultures is part of it. I think we're going to need to look at how we move in this direction as part of an overall push for sustainability and climate action. Of course, I'd also just point out there are a lot of things in the Inflation Reduction Act I wasn't too excited about, and that are leading to unintended consequences, some intended, some unintended. And that's where we need to, as you say, take a systems-based approach, which I'm a big believer in. And how do you find those pressure points where you can begin as an entry point, get everybody to the table, and then move from there to create that systems-wide change. The movement of food and goods across the border is a complicated one, and we saw, the governor of Texas force trucks to wait to get into the country and moving goods and all the consequences there because he wanted to make a political stunt, but that had huge economic consequences. So it's hard to think systemically when you have leaders who really have no desire to be systemic in their thinking, let alone short-term actions that have better long-term gains and outcomes for everyone. That's the challenge.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's not so much that it's a loaded question, but to your point with regards to systems, the current systems that we have within our own nation, within North America, with Canada to the north, with Mexico here today, is highly disjointed and highly siloed. As much as rhetoric that we talk, perhaps if we can have a foreign minister, El Canciller, Marcelo Ebrard, our folks, ambassador, macro, MOUs, memorandums of understandings, when it comes down to the minutia, and we talk about with regards to systems and whether it's sequestration or just keeping it into the ground, it's about political leadership, because that's what makes it so challenging, because you have the hyper-local level, you have the state, and then you have the national. And you have so many different entities. And when you have so many different entities, what you're asking for, which is the obvious, and you're absolutely correct, is something that's systematic, that's efficient. I can say it's more challenging, but you're absolutely right. I would agree with you 100%.
We have time for one more question. Anyone? No?
One more going once, one going twice.
Yeah, okay.
It's not a question. My name is René Cabrera from Emerson. Well, it's kind of a feeling of frustration because everybody understand the climate change and its importance. We as Emerson, we have 20-something facilities in Mexico. We're ready, we're willing to invest, but governments, you mentioned Trump, you mentioned Bolsonaro, and particularly frustrating, our Mexican government, it's not as willing to cooperate with us.
Exactly.
The capital is 101, perhaps more than that. The press will cheer the efforts that we are doing, but we are not progressing at the speed we are expecting. So, what's your thought about how to convince to the people who is constructing a new refinery instead of something different? or to go against. And if you talk with them, the government press talk with them, they say, well, we are willing to do it, we are forward to that targets. What's your thought about that? I mean, because everybody knows that it's important, but the reality is a little bit different.
Bueno,
It was not
a mí no me compete platicar, ¿no? O comentar sobre los asuntos internos, ¿no? De un querido vecino como México, pero yo quisiera nomás enfatizar y subrayar lo siguiente, ¿no? Yo entiendo completamente, ¿no? la ansiedad del pueblo, la frustración, de los ciudadanos a lo largo y ancho de la República Mexicana con el actual gobierno a nivel federal. I'll just leave it at that right there. You know, I won't go further than that. I just think that this is really important to be here together because we can't go back to the future. You know, there was a golden era when Pemex played a huge role building the economy. But like I said, you know, California is the 5th largest economy in the world, precisely because we're also a big oil producer, precisely because we were into extraction a lot. We didn't become the 5th largest economy in the world based on all green renewable energy. You're not. You know how we're one of the biggest oil producing states, you know, in the United States of America. But now we've transitioned and we're moving in a larger direction. I can, you know, you have a new, you know, election coming up, and whoever your next president's going to be, the ones competing within Morena and whatever happens with El PAN, El PRI, if they have a plausible candidate, you know, I hear things, and I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but, you know, I mean, I think perhaps the next president, el próximo sexenio, is going to probably have a much more forward, innovative, you know, way of thinking for the future of Mexico.
You know a lot about Mexican politics, eh?
Algo un poquito, ¿no?
Let me tell you, you were saved by the bell, but...
Quick thing, Dad, I get your I feel that sense of desperation sometimes, even when we have the right leaders in place. And you know, well, it's not the panacea, it's not the silver bullet. We face a world and a society where I think this is true with Trump. A lot of people see it as aspiration. Oh man, I want to be like him someday, so I think I'm going to vote for him because it's crazy. But there's the other side where Tesla is now the most valuable company in the world. Well, after I can't remember where they are with Apple, but certainly the most valuable automaker in the world. And or you look at one of the richest person in India. He had oil and gas holdings, but then when he went into renewable energy, he became the third richest, second richest person in the world. So how can we use that aspiration to get people to think differently? Like voting for somebody who's moving us backwards is not going to make my life better, your life better. We've got to vote for people who are going to put the right signals in place to make those sorts of stories happen more and more.
I would like just briefly to add that I love your comment. For us, people interested in the topics or working in climate change and these kind of sustainability topics, we all work with passion, we all work with a sense of urgency, but we all work with frustration. Everywhere. We're trying to convince, and that's what I've been doing for years, convincing on this understanding. So just the brief message is that transition is gradual. In some places it's coming slower, but eventually it will reach every organization and every country. I mean, the reality is going to take place, and I think, I know it's hard to say, let's be patient, but just let's keep building wherever we can advance. We're doing that as a bank, and think about the transition. It's gradual, keep engaging, and keep pushing forward.
Well, Marius, Calvet, Matt Petersen, Kevin De Leon, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.